Welcome to the fifth of 5 videos on the Roman Army 2021 lecture on state and retirement, and the last video for this course, and hopefully the last video I'll make. Definitely this year. Maybe ever. Okay, so in this final one, we've had a rough trajectory, again, sort of following the lives in the book, Pulo, Paulion, and Aemilianus, from when they first enlisted to their, we now get to people have died, to their retirement. And I'm going to talk, just say a few little things about retirement, not a lot. I can try and keep it short and concise, but I'm also going to say a little bit about, kind of following on from the previous video where I talked a bit about police. I also want to touch on something that has only sort of been below the surface before, and that is what the military was inside the state, and also the special position that soldiers had as a sort of own little standalone society, and then, how this filters down to veterans. So, soldiers as distinct society and veterans. The final video. Okay. So one way you can, not everyone does, but one way you could see the Roman military is as an institution. So what is an institution? And there has been interesting work on defining military culture and conceptualizing, theorizing the army as an institution for this paper by Wilson, 2008, some journal that I've forgotten, but it's an interesting article on defining military culture. And he defines an institution as an established, significant, and recognized practice, relationship, or organization in a society or culture. And, by that definition, you could say that this is what the military was. Okay, it was established, it was significant, it was recognized, and it was a big part of society, Roman society, and culture. And when he does so in this paper, he looks at several different aspects. Its mission, combat, other, and we've talked about its mission in terms of combat. We've looked at that a little bit, and other. I just did a video on police, so there's other things. Its relation to the state and other institutions. So maybe haven't talked much about its relation to other institutions. A bit on religion, sort of scattered throughout. Though religion is not really, and this is where it falls apart a bit. And we've talked a bit about its relation to society vis-a-vis friendship, marriage, and other things, and even the policing as well. And we've looked at its organization, its internal structure, and also a bit on its access to resources. And education we've touched on a bit with officers, and technology a bit with equipment, and money with pay, and so on. So in many ways, it is kind of like this institution, okay, this sort of standalone specific thing, but it's also sometimes the military is seen as its own distinct society within the wider Roman world. And we have sort of in our live sessions touched on this in class, when I noted things like, soldiers are treated extremely well. They get privileged treatment. The legions are better documented in this respect than others, but we know that they have certain rights and responsibilities, but they also have certain privileges, especially when it comes to the law. And this is something we talked about. So I believe it might have been a different class, but there are plenty of laws involving soldiers, both ones specifically for soldiers, some of which we've looked at, and those that involve soldiers. And when there are ones involving criminal trials or criminal wrongdoing that, say, involves a soldier and a civilian, there are usually two legal systems. There's the civilian legal system, and there's the Roman military legal system. If there are two parties involved, it inevitably is investigated and tried in the Roman military court, not the civilian one. If you're a Roman citizen, you have better luck at getting something that could be called a fair trial than if not. And that's true that's also true only involving civilians. Roman citizens better than non-citizens. We maybe don't always have a lot of evidence on the ground. So we have some laws that talk about this, and which sorts of courts should be involved, but the laws are just how things should go and what should happen, and don't always reflect what actually did happen, as we've seen with marriages involving soldiers. So what happens? And so there, we get some of these petitions and loans and lawsuits in some documents, which give us some idea how it goes. But and there was an established legal process, but some of the nitty gritty we don't know. Now, why are the soldiers treated so well? Well, we know that they are, and I've always said a little bit about the relation between soldiers and emperors. The emperors stress their victory, and for propagandistic purposes, they stress their relationship with soldiers as fellow soldiers. They pay them in theory regularly, and give them extra cash. Maybe on their birthdays and on anniversaries of them becoming emperor. But because the emperors, mostly recognized the importance of the soldiers, that it was also possible. I mean, in theory, a lot of people, a civilian could reach out to the emperor if they wanted to, but soldiers could too. And there were many more opportunities perhaps for them to reach out to the emperor somehow, even if most of them didn't. They could send letters. We have some examples of this, people reaching out to the emperor about certain queries. And in theory, there's a lot of these. I mean, this is a separate issue. There's a lot of interesting evidence. Fergus Miller, who's recently passed away, has written about petitions and so on, carried out towards the emperor. A lot of laws that we have are actually like petitions. Someone sent a petition to the emperor, empress about the thing, and the emperor, empress replied with a response. It sort of becomes law. So we have this avenue for communication connected to the law with this distinct body of individuals, the military. As I noted, though, there are certain reasons why they do this as well, partly because of the conditions of their jobs. There's some recognition that there are aspects of being a soldier that make it difficult to get the kind of treatment that maybe they would get in civilian life, or at least that's maybe how I'm seeing it. So if you made it very difficult for soldiers to be treated well vis-a-vis the law, and law is an overarching aspect of life, then that might dissuade people from volunteering in the first place. So I think when we talked about recruitment, whenever that was, it feels like a lifetime ago, but although it changed over time and conscription became slightly more of a thing in later antiquity, for the most part, these were volunteers who were signing up. So you want to make it appealing. Besides offering money, shelter, etc., positive recourse via the law. But also, of course, the other points I'm stressing here, soldiers spend a lot of time far away, and they can't, look after their family members and property back at home. So these extra provisions sort of need to be in place, and a lot of the laws deal with what happens when they're away and what they can do. There's a lot of provisions for the circumstances with which or in which they can make wills, their deathbed, etc. And the state does seem to have done a number of things, even if it is reactionary, to ensure that their stuff is okay while they're off doing these things. Now, this could be because of the concern for the rights of the soldiers, but probably there's more pragmatic things, partly just to encourage people to volunteer. Why would you do this if your property is going to go to pot and things, people could steal your stuff or whatever while you're away. But also, again, they want people to volunteer, and they're also concerned, if you got a whole bunch of armed men who are angry with you for not making sure that your stuff was safe while you were away, then you might lose your position. So there's all these reasons for making it like this. So at least in a legal capacity, we sort of get this standalone society. And we've talked a bit about friends and family, and to some degree, these military communities were the sort of separate society, and you could transfer between and have some shared values, even if some languages differed and provinces differed, but there was a lot of continuity as well. Okay. So let's move on to the end. So what happens? Life expectancy. Eventually, you can retire. Now, how many retire? And these are all guesstimates, and I sort of drew on, actually in the book, I talked about some census data from Canada, where I'm from. But there are a lot of things you sort of need to bear in mind as we look at retirement and think about who might actually make it to the end. life. Not a lot of people made it from birth to death. Something like, and a lot of these are guesstimates, so they're not absolute. There are different variations, theories, etc. Maybe a third to half of all newborns die by age 5. Birth was difficult. Not only is it difficult today, but life-threatening both to the mothers and to the children in antiquity, the pre-modern world. So it's possible a lot of people wouldn't make it. If one set of calculations, which is quite different from today, if you assume that however many people did make it, and then men enlisted to be soldiers, so one possibility, if you take 100 soldiers, say from one place, enlisting at the age of 20, we said it's around 20, maybe 19, maybe 18, but let's say around 20, based on things like just accidental death and disease, and then dying in combat or in other activities. We have a couple of those sort of strength reports that maybe list, this number of guys died by bandits, or one guy died by drowning, and there are all those killed by war. So maybe, and of course this number would vary depending on what year. If it was a very militarily active period of a few years, then the numbers might be different. But okay, so all these asterisks and exceptions. But if there are 100 who enlisted at 20 years of age, maybe 78 of them might make it to 35. So within 15 years, which if you're Praetorian is getting near the end of your terms of service, but if you're legionary, you still got a few more years to go. Maybe 69 to make it to 40. So that's when legionaries are probably done and they can call it home. And then maybe 60 to 45, which is when auxiliaries. And also, of course, there's also things like desertion and whatever else. The baseline attrition rate is about a third for 20-25 years service. And if you think about it, you need about maybe 50,000 new recruits per year, which might make up about 2.5% of the 20-year-old males within a population of 60 to 70 million. And that also means if you have hypothetically 15,000 recruits per year, you might have 6,000 to 7,000 45-year-olds per year. But that's, these are all guesses, so not absolute. And obviously don't quite match up, but it's approximate. So retirement, what do we know? There's been a lot of work on retirement. There's a lot of interesting work on veteran colonies. They have sort of, in the Republican era and into the early imperial era, it was often veterans who went off and with the state and established colonies and places to boast their Roman control, etc. For a while, veterans would be given land when they retired, and then eventually they're like, there's not enough land, so we'll give them money, which is one of the things that Augustus sort of really helped implement, and by making it such that soldiers got paid regularly, also establishing a treasury, then there'd be money available to pay them, and also to give them some cash upon retirement. There's no pension, so you have to save and hope. How many people would live much longer after retirement? We don't know. Some could, but it's definitely a thing. And cash upon retirement, like a lump sum or something, is a possibility. Now, there are other things that came with retirement. So you may not get like a regular pension, but a lot of soldiers, a lot of veterans stayed in their local community because they show up in inscriptions and you can see roughly where they are. But there are also a lot of people who probably returned to where they were from. It's a possibility as well. Maybe went somewhere else. You are exempted from some taxes, so to make the financial burden a little bit better, and immune from certain punishments. And then I'd say we have some evidence for retirement diplomas and other things as well. So the final thing just to note about veterans. So obviously if you're an auxiliary, and this is just meant to be my old retired guy shotgun, maybe that'll be me, as I don't do guns. So auxiliaries, obviously one of the great benefits, and the three guys, Pullo, Pauli, and Aemilianus, they're not auxiliaries, but if they had been, one of the things that they would get, obviously, which I think would be a good thing, regardless of where they were from, but in terms of as far as the power they would have within wider Roman society for themselves and family members, is citizenship. So citizenship is a great thing, for an individual, even if you whatever you hate Rome, because it means you have more rights in court cases than not. It gives you more rights for vis-a-vis taxes and all sorts of other privileges, and it can bring greater chance at wealth and prosperity for subsequent generations. So it's just a positive thing. Now with auxiliaries up until 140, kids can get citizenship, and then wives no dice. But yeah, there you go. One other thing, of course, up until they changed the marriage laws, which was sometime in the middle of the 3rd century CE. Obviously, up until then, if you hadn't married while you were a soldier and you made it to the end, one thing you could legally do, you could have a formal Roman legal marriage upon retirement. Okay, now you can't marry lots of people, but that's what you can do. You get cash, a donative, and again, at least for some cases, some land. And yeah, possibility maybe of some other careers, but who knows? Some have some political office and maybe get involved in some commercial enterprises, but there's a wide variety of things. Anyway, so that's it. That's the end. Yeah, and I will stop there. Live long and prosper.